And so for our next session, we will have a conversation on AI and justice that will be led by Professor Jacqueline Burkell, who is a professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies and Associate Vice President Research at the University of Western Ontario. And she's one of the co-leader of the Stroke Partnership Grant on AI and Cyber Justice Act. Jacqueline, the floor is yours.
Okay. Oh, excellent. All right. So we as the people on this panel have spent a little bit of time talking about the title of the panel, AI and Justice, and asking ourselves questions. And we realized that following on the excellent example this morning of Jason and Chantal, we're going to invoke a little audience participation to start this one off, because the room is hot, because the day is long, and because we think that you have a lot of important things to say. We would like to have channeled our friend Ian Curran, started with some music. We wanted to play the Beatles, You Say You Want a Revolution, but we couldn't because of copyright and other issues, we think. Copyright, it was copyright, concerns about copyright. We didn't think about it soon enough, so we can't start you off with music. But what we are going to do is ask you to turn to your table mates, and if you don't have table mates, please move and find some. I can see somebody here who's missing table mates at this point. And we just invite you to have a short discussion about that title. What does it mean for you? And what questions come up for you? What are your burning questions about AI and justice? What does that title mean to you? And we're going to we're taking a bit of a risk here. We've all thrown away our notes. I will introduce my co-panelists after we come back, but right now, we just want to turn it over to you to say, what do you want to know? And what are your thoughts about this? So, 5 minutes. Well, we were thinking, do you think we should ask them to move on?
No, maybe not.
No.
I see a few of you out there who are sitting alone at a table. This is not going to work.
No.
You have to find friends, and you might need to move to the front half of the room. I know. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Only moving forwards.
Yeah.
I know, guys. It's Friday at 4 p.m.
Okay. We're going to set a timer. 7 minutes. All right. Oh my goodness, how lovely. Okay. So, this panel is, as I intimated, a co-production, and what we would like to do is to go out to you first with this specific question. At your table, and anybody who wants to speak to this, please come up to the microphones and speak. When you look at that title, what does it mean to you? What did you think about, or what did your table decide? AI and justice. What's the topic? What's the content?
Don't all jump up at once.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
So again, I'm privileged to be sitting with lawyers, so we definitely wanted to look at it, I think, from that lens. The three examples that we discussed among us were the interdiction de prise de décision automatique en justice. So around the world, we're seeing cases where the judges are offered algorithms to help them make their decisions, either at sentencing or when they're trying to judge for recidivism, and that some jurisdictions, like in France, have outlawed it entirely. We're not actually sure how much it's even being used in Canada, so far as I understand, and in the States they're using it a lot. I don't know if any of that's accurate. That's what we're talking about, though.
Sorry, just a second. For the technician, there is a lot of echo at our end. If it's possible.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is that me, maybe? Should I be less echoey? Do you hear me better now? Is it clearer? Still a bit of echo, eh? And we had also the positive example, so algorithms that can prevent criminalization or can be used by groups to mobilize against discrimination in criminal and justice environments, contested environments. Thank you.
Thank you. Taking notes.
Okay. All right. My name is Isaac. From our table, if you're asking the meaning of AI injustice, we came up with that. AI injustice refers to the intersection of artificial intelligence, technology, and ethical consideration, which surrounds implementation of legal systems. And then here, we want to know it's involving that AI systems use within the justice system, and then the principles that it will hold in terms of transparency, accountability, and non-discrimination. So basically, that's what we also came up with. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we were trying, the lawyers at the table were trying really hard not to dominate the conversation, and I think we succeeded because the first thing that we talked about that was talked about with respect to justice was the importance of treating people equitably. And justice conceived as social justice, not as legal systems, or not wholly as legal systems. So justice beyond the law. And then thinking about that in the context of AI, to not only to think about the injustices brought out by AI, but to think about how we can, to imagine AI that avoids re-entrenching systemic power imbalances, and maybe actually goes further to help to start to redistribute power.
Okay. All right.
That's what you get when you don't let lawyers dominate.
Do we have? Excellent.
So AI actually provides an opportunity to identify injustice. We talk a lot about bias, discrimination playing out through AI as if it were only a liability, but it also offers this opportunity to articulate deeper, more entrenched, diffused patterns because it kind of hard codes it or makes it visible. So we can use AI to intervene in these really intractable phenomena.
Thank you. All right.
So much.
Or do you want to, Caitlin, you can go too. Okay, do it.
Go for it.
So we were at a table with one philosopher, one artist, and one lawyer. Maybe I dominated too much, but we talked about justice as an amorphous kind of moral concept that we don't really have a solid definition for, but it's something that we feel intuitively rather than being able to pinpoint it, which would pose a challenge for AI. That's it.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, if I may, my name is Karine Gentelet. Do I introduce myself?
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm professor of social science at Université du Québec en Outaouais, which is just the other side of the river. Not well known, but we are still here. And also, I do research on how technology can empower people in the recognition of their rights. And I'm also a former holder of the fellowship. I'm Queen Consort after Kate Crawford. So, and I mainly do research on social justice and AI. And this is very interesting what you said about that, about concept of justice, because in the panel we don't have the same definition of what is justice, especially I'm a sociologist. So, you know, for me, this is more about social justice than just access to court, strictly access to court. And in that sense, the broader definition of justice is very important. And what you say is justice regarding AI. For me, this is justice before AI. And I wish that at some point in academic event, we will have, you know, title of panel which will be justice and AI, and not AI and justice, because this is justice existed before AI, and I don't see as a sociologist why. I'm very critical, okay? So I don't see why, as a society, we have to redefine everything, our governance model, also our value, because we are facing a new technology. It's a very invasive one. I agree with that, but this is, yeah. So justice and AI. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Katie Salegi. I'm an assistant professor of law at the University of Manitoba, and I study predictive analytics and machine learning and algorithms as they relate to really foundational legal concepts. So I like to think about privacy and property, autonomy and consent, and I'm really interested in how legal theory intersects with new technologies. And so in my doctoral work, one of the things that I was really focused on was thinking through the legal construct of the rule of law, specifically. And the rule of law being this nebulous thing that we attach a lot of significance to in society as an organizing force, right, as a legal fiction that we allow ourselves to propagate sort of through the ages. And when we have common law methodologies in particular that are anchored on an idea of a collective story that's being picked up and is being carried on, maybe, you know, one day you find that secret dissent that somebody wrote 35 years ago and its moment has come, you have the opportunity to shift law through story. So what happens if AI, you know, entrenches a particular version of that story when the foundational concepts are still being adjudicated or still being discussed? And what I heard in the different definitions, but I love, Caitlin, what you said at the end about, you know, the contested nature of that concept, right? Because a lot of really foundational ideas are contested concepts. And so we have malleable definitions or definitions that we're struggling to get at from different angles, from different disciplines in an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary space like this. We can really struggle with that. And so while we have justice, you know, dispensations of AI within the judicial system, and we can talk a little bit more about specific examples, including things like sentencing software and facial recognition technologies, what we're also thinking about is that broader conception of justice, right? And how do we think through problems of justice as they pertain to equality or things that sociologists would be really concerned about, right? We have this foundational idea that justice or the rule of law, these things are good, right? But we don't really know why they're good. We just know that they are a good. This is how Ryan Tahamanas discusses it in the rule of law literature, and I think it's a really useful way of anchoring it.
So I'm Jackie Burkell, and I am a professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario. And I've had the privilege to work with, I'm not a legal scholar, I'm privileged to work with legal scholars in a number of different circumstances, including on two big SSHRC partnership grants. One, the Autonomy Through Cyber Justice project out of the University of UDM, and one, the Equality Project led by Jane Bailey and Val Steeves here at University of Ottawa. And as a social scientist, engaged in, and as an empiricist, and as somebody engaged in a project that looks at the application of AI in the judicial system, when I read AI and Justice, I thought about, and there was something that Florian said today that signaled to me that maybe this was the way he was thinking about it as well. I thought about, well, how does AI and the use of AI applications in the judicial process affect that process? And in fact, if I look at what I do and what I think about, because as a psychologist, as a cognitive psychologist, I start with the individual, and I start with the way in which the individual interacts with the world. And I think about how does the interposition of technology or the interpolation of technology in those processes change them? How does the use of search engines change the way in which people understand the world because they encounter different information? How does the interpolation of communication technology in interactions between people change the interactions of those people and change what happens as a result of that, change the relationships? And my feeling about it is that this percolates up, that I think you can think about psychology and the individual feeding into society and the system, feeding into the sort of the larger cultural and societal and organizational issues. And in fact, it reminded me today, I think it was yesterday, I said to you I was going to be talking about the individual, and you said you were really focused on the social issue and the socio-cultural and systemic aspects of equality. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you see those things at odds, because I think you were saying you think we shouldn't be privileging the psychological.
Yeah, about especially the social, why for me access to justice or justice and AI cannot be seen outside the concept of social justice, meaning that most of the time, and when I started working on AI, because before that I was working on digital technology, and now I'm starting really to focus on AI, it is interesting that even in AI, when I talk with people working in AI, but also with legal colleagues, talking about individual. But for me as a sociologist, you know, society is not the sum on individuals. It's more than that. It's a collective movement, and my actual preoccupation as a sociologist, I did a lot of research, a lot of interviews with specifically marginalized groups and communities, but also civil society organizations, is that there is potential very deep impact on social movement and solidarity, collective solidarity, how we, you know, the social interaction and how we include people. And some of you mentioned that, you know, discrimination, this is one of the issues. Sometimes we talk about harm, but it's more than that. It's more than harm. This is human being and large amount of population, mostly already at the margin of the society, that are pushed even further. So for me, there is an issue, and this is why this kind of event and conversation that we're having, multidisciplinary, and to have many scholars, but also people from civil society, because once again, I think they are one of the key actors in that conversation, that we need to think about where we are going at societies, human societies, and what are the values that we want to move forward, despite any kind of movement from AI and technology. Probably when I work with Guy Rocher, he's a sociologist, he's quite old actually, but he's also, oh, it's recorded. But he's always bringing, you know, the historical perspective, saying, you know, human society, when you look back at ages, we have faced many, many challenges, and maybe AI is another one. It could be very exceptional, I agree with that, but this is another kind of development that we need to figure out at human societies, and just make sure that we keep in mind that collective movement and the values that we put in place, because when you talk to people, and also somebody talk about justice and injustices, when you ask people, okay, what is justice for you? What is justice when you're regarding technology? And most of the time, they don't talk about justice. They talk about injustices, and the injustices they have been faced, and the fact that they are not seen, they are not heard. So, and so I close the circle, being that this is why access to justice is also access to social justice.
I was wondering what you would say about that, because I'm talking about people and their interaction with the system, and Karine is really clearly talking about social community and cultural ideas about justice, and you're thinking about it in a completely different way.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to think about it, for sure. What I worry about is that when people hear AI and justice, the first thing that they're going to think about is sentencing software, right? It's like, oh yeah, did you read that article in 2016 from ProPublica? And like, we're just stuck there. We're stuck in this paradigm about machine bias and about the fact that you're going to compute how long somebody's sentence is going to be based on their recidivism risk. And there's been so much work done, like on the ProPublica study, subsequently with like follow-on research. So I'm sure everybody in the room knows about that article, right? The one's machine bias.
Yes.
Machine learning is being used to sentence offenders, and it's biased against blacks. All right, but then depending on how we look at it, right, depending on what kind of analysis we do, we end up just talking past one another. And I think this came up yesterday in the conversation about inclusion and equity. I think it was Andrew was saying, like, I'm so tired of everybody just talking about algorithms and bias, because what ends up happening is like there's a lot of cross purposes when it comes to definitional approaches to it. And then you also see issues about justice, I think, that adhere in different ways. And the one that I find the most interesting is sort of casting a broader net to think about the power that is going to be associated with algorithmic technologies. And so when we think about the rule of law, for example, as a construct that is supposed to be deployed in society to give us protection against the state, right? Because the state is this big, serious thing, and we are the small, little liberal individual, like small L liberal in a classical philosophical sense, right? And so we need protection against the state because the state can do things to us. And that's why we have privacy protections, that's why we have freedom of speech, that's why we have a lot of constitutional rights in the way that they've been conceptualized. But it doesn't take into account the way that things have shifted through the technological revolution and through the expansion of the administrative state, where you're having these quasi-judicial functions or quasi-administrative functions being meted out by a lot of different actors in addition to the state itself, and most particularly recently, technology companies, right? So now when we're thinking about rule of law problems, I think we need to be characterizing those in broader instances where we see power differentials and those kinds of power dynamics. And that's going to include non-state actors, because it necessarily means the technology companies that are going to be designing those algorithms that are going to be used maybe by the state or in quasi-ish state interactions, right? So if you have a company like Clearview AI, for example, that they've got their values, they've got their internal code of conduct, and we're supposed to somehow be satisfied with that when they then produce a tool that can be deployed and used by police forces all around the world. And the way in which the rule of law was traditionally conceived was intended to protect us against state power, but that power has been delegated to so many other actors. And I think some of the risks that we see moving into the generative AI or large language space is going to exacerbate those same types of tensions.
I want to come back to something you mentioned, and I think we've already talked about this, and in fact we started talking about this, was this issue of definition and slippage. Because so in my world, I'm a positivist, and sometimes that's a dirty word. But what I really focus on, and I'm also an interdisciplinary scholar, and that means, for those of you who embrace that I end up in a lot of rooms feeling really dumb a lot of the time, because people know so much more than I do. But I've come to learn to trust my gut on something, which is when I truly don't understand, when I truly can't follow what's going on in a room, what it often means is that people are talking like this. And I think in this space that happens all the time. We talk about justice, we talk about fairness. In fact, a lot of the whole Compass thing, not all of it, there are real issues with the deployment of that software, but the immediate kind of firestorm, really, if you pull it apart, is about different definitions of fairness. That's really what it comes down to. When I say fair, I mean one thing. When you say fair, you mean another thing. But we both say fair, and we think we're talking about the same thing, and we're going to have an argument. In fact, they weren't talking about the same thing at all. So I think it's really important that we pay careful attention to the fact that oftentimes we don't share ground, to use a phrase that Kate Crawford used the other night. We don't share ground truth. We are not moving from the same understanding of the world. I wonder whether that resonates with you, and if so, how?
You want me to go? Okay. Oh, yes. Definitely. I'm a sociologist. I'm talking to tech people, legal people. How many conferences did I speak? And I say, I am sure nobody has a clue what I'm talking about.
Yes.
That's me. But I think for me, this is a very interesting conversation, but no offense, this is a discussion from privileged people.
Yes.
Being able to have a deep conversation about fairness, okay? Because when you talk to people, and I'm sorry, because this is my work as a sociologist, I go on field and I talk to people. I say, okay, you know what, fairness, yeah, maybe, yeah, but I have injustices and I'm not heard. And I'm collaborating with First Nation people right now, and this is an issue for them. how technology, how they will be represented into any kind of digital tool, AI tool that will be implemented. And the worst fear were during the COVID, for example, because they have been included without their consent, and they said that, you know what, everything that we struggled for the past 20 years has been like swept because of this algorithm, and I don't blame them to be to don't have trust in that, and to just say, okay, discuss about fairness, discuss about access to justice, fine, but we have more present needs, and we will need to be recognized, represent, acknowledge. I don't know which word choosing, but this is clearly an issue that need to be addressed. And as an academic, and as I am talking also to academic, I think this is also something that need to be addressed. And I'm sorry to be a broken record, but this is why also, when talking about justice and AI, I think we have to broaden the conversation and consider everything related to social issues, social interactions, solidarity. In Canada, elsewhere also, and I'm not talking about solidarity between North and South, sorry, but I'm finished.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much we could add to this, right? We can talk about the different sort of critical scholars who have thought through how algorithmic dispensations of justice tend to be deployed first in like low rights environment, right? And then they eventually make their way up the food chain. And so we can kind of see any of these things that are being deployed against people who are in less privileged positions as a test case for what we can expect to be in society writ large in 5 or 10 years. And we can also, I think, be really worried about the way in which, I'm thinking back to the panel earlier and some of the stuff that Jen and Catherine were talking about in terms of the way that algorithms are being deployed within government, right? And so there's that administrative morass that people come up against that you just don't have time to be able to make sense of it. And so there are like these small little incursions on people's experience within the world that have justice eroding effects that are going to eventually get kicked downstream more and more in different ways. And then we have the really big and obvious ones, right, where we see that in the recidivism software, in the different tools that are being used that are privacy invasive or being used by different police forces and or being deployed with an eye to efficiency or having the latest and the greatest technology, right, which is always something that I find really nefarious about this kind of stuff, right? And the conversations around professional ethics and using generative language models in different professions often attached to that same point as well, where, oh, look how much faster it's going to be, right? Look how much efficient, and then we can sort of treat that like our junior associate, and now we're the partner and we're assigning tasks, and how are we going to be able to construct something out of that, which it kind of negates how the entire system works, really, if you're going to be honest about it.
Mm-hmm. Some of the earliest thinking that I did about access to justice and AI on technology, just not AI specifically, was thinking about the non-universal deployment, which is something we definitely need to consider, and the fact that we often, when we're not deeply worried about technology, we sometimes think that it's kind of just a neutral insertion, and I saw this in early discussions about the use of video conferencing technology in the courtroom. And we can do this. We can bring in the defendant in a bail determination. It's not a high stakes determination. We'll bring them in by a video conferencing link. And I looked at it and I thought about it. And I thought, well, so who gets brought in, and what are the consequences for them being brought in, and how does their power and their influence in a room where everybody else is together change, because it's a non-neutral substitution. And I think we have to think that way all the time about technologies, ones we're more familiar with, ones we're less familiar with, that they don't just slide into a pre-existing spot in the interactions that we always have. They change things fundamentally, and I will say sometimes they change things for the better. I think there are some aspects of access to technology that could, or to justice that could be improved by the use of technology, but not everything, not universally, and not by default. We have to be very careful about that.
Yeah. I mean, someone the other day, in all seriousness, not tongue-in-cheek, told me that the way to solve access to justice problems in Ontario was to get computer terminals in every courthouse that do generative AI to help self-represented litigants do their pleadings, and there'll be one supervising lawyer just like walking around and checking to make sure.
That's for the people who can't afford the real lawyers, though.
And so first of all, yes, it is only for the people who can't afford real lawyers. Those people will go over there, right? There's, some of you might be familiar with this interesting thing that blew up on Twitter, as it was then known, earlier this year. This guy called Joshua Browder, who owns a company called Do Not Pay. So this is a consumer protection focused organization that alleges to help people by doing things like helping you finally get rid of your phone provider, or helping you finally cancel your cable service. And so he wanted to have the very first self-represented litigant that would be assisted by AI, and he was going to have somebody wear AirPods and go into a Massachusetts courtroom on like a routine traffic violation, but the AI was going to tell the self-represented litigant what to say. And people got upset about this for a whole host of different reasons, like first of all, the bot never went to law school, he's holding himself out as a lawyer, so there are a whole bunch of like state bar things that he's run afoul of. But also there's sort of this deeper question about, well, who is going to be the one accessing this service? And Browder himself is like, well, a lawyer's not going to get out of bed to help you for less than $400, so maybe we should make this type of service available. And the downstream consequences for that, for the concept of justice, are really big for lots of reasons.
But at the same time, you have this massive problem with self-represented litigants who are in the system, who don't know what to do, who are disenfranchised, and who, like, and I'm not saying that's the answer, but it's like, that's the problem. So I literally almost spoke over you. Let me hand it to you.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and there is maybe many solutions, but also I wanted to talk about the research I just finished, and I did some interviews with developers of justice initiative, social justice initiative. We interview people in Canada, Quebec, US, Spain, South Africa, and India. So we have a variety of initiatives, and most of them, and this is maybe the best part of the research, is that sometimes when we talk about justice, first of all, access to justice is not the only solution for them to solve their problem, first of all, but also, they have a very strong digital agency about and assessment of their what is going on and how they have been discriminated. When you talk about them and say, we know that they have been systematically discriminated by any kind of state agency, for example, or by algorithm. We were talking about this initiative in India, rural India, helping women, and there is caste discrimination, but also the Aadhaar system was making life of some women a nightmare. But they are very aware of the situation, even they cannot, provide the exact word, they can find support. So this is very interesting also to see that, access to justice cannot be a one-way solution, but many way, and tabling is maybe a French word saying in English, but using digital agency of people, relying on digital agency, and the fact that people will provide the solution of their own problem and give them the space to do that, because this is also what is very interesting when you talk about access to justice is and from my sociological background, you have state and you have the judicial, and the state decide what kind of, because of a lot of good reason, but at some point just give the space of people to be able to define their own problem and find that solution. I think it could be really interesting to see.
So at this point, We'd like to throw it out to you. So we're returning maybe to your table conversations, and in the context of what we've been talking about, I'd like to open the microphones, and if you have questions, you can, we may or may not be able to speak to it, but we would love to try. So I will open the floor. And if you can speak slowly, because we do have some difficulty up
Yeah, it's
here.
like a little bit echoey.
It's a little fuzzy and echoey up here.
I will speak slowly.
Thank you.
It's a naive question. You laughed when at the idea, two of you laughed very loudly about the idea of people using ChatGPT for their legal defense. Granted, it's inaccurate. Granted, it needs checking. But I'm not really sure why it's so funny. I mean, they're doing it. They're already doing it. I'm in business. I write my own contracts. I already did. Now I write them faster. I still vet them with a lawyer, but I write them a lot faster. So, people are using it. That's reality. So I'm wondering, I want to understand the laughter, is what I want to understand. Is it just because it's inaccurate and it's sort of like, well, it can never be a lawyer? I agree. But I mean, it's better than no lawyer, isn't it?
This is a great question. I'm not laughing at anyone, I'm laughing at the situation. And I think it is really awful for a whole bunch of reasons. So first of all, I think that there is this privileging of law as a legal profession, where that is a whole part of the argument, where people are like, well, you're not a lawyer, so you couldn't possibly ever understand the complicated nature of law. Okay, that is silly. But I do think that that is out there, and I think that you will definitely hear those responses about, and you hear that response about anyone who is a self-represented litigant, or people who do draft their own contracts, and they're like, oh, you definitely need to go get a real estate lawyer to review this very basic lease, right? And most people can't afford to do that. I cannot hear you.
Self-represented litigant has a fool for a client, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Agreed. But that is not a good, framing, I think, to be in for these problems. What worries me is the phenomena of automation bias and automation complacency. So when we engage with technological analogs for human decision making, there is a tendency to think that those technologies are authoritative. And that is very well documented in the psychological literature, and somehow it doesn't, because of this disciplinary siloing that happens, it doesn't tend to make it very often into the conversations about legal ethics or the conversations about deployments of technology. So with Jason Miller, we've done a lot of work on automated driver assistance systems. With Jackie, we did a great report on targeting trust in the context of autonomous weapons a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And you see the same phenomena that come up time and time again, which is as soon as a technological system says something, people tend to defer to that system. So this idea that you are going to use ChatGPT to do your first draft, and then you're going to come in and you're going to make it better, that people are championing, I think is flawed, because that isn't what the literature shows us is the way people interact with the products of technology. And there will definitely be exceptions and people who are skilled in the art who will think critically about it. But Compass is a perfect example of this. Compass, there's a 137-point questionnaire that was used for judges to predict recidivism risk. Those were not supposed to be used for sentencing. They were very specifically supposed to be used as only a tool, and they were supposed to be used in pre-trial determinations only. That is not how Compass is deployed. That is not what happens. Instead, it gets printed out. A judge, a highly learned person who has a law degree, multiple years of experience at the bar before they're even allowed to be a judge, and then many years of judicial training, still gets this and goes, oh, the machine said this person is a likely recidivism risk. Guess they're going to jail.
Yeah.
And that is how the technology is used. And I could go on, but maybe I'll let Karin jump in.
No.
Okay.
I think, what she said, to use a phrase from yesterday, I do think it's interesting. This is something that cognitive psychology and other areas of psychology can tell us a lot about. There is a long history of work in this area. All of those things are true. I think that with respect to these kinds of computational tools to help us, or AI tools to help us make decisions, there is a lot of cautionary information that can be gleaned from the decision-making literature to understand just how tremendously difficult it is to discount something like an AI tool that's producing for you a potential judgment. And this is not a diss on judges using the tools. It's actually a recognition of the way our decision-making capacities work. That if I'm told something and that is presented to me as information that has veracity, it turns out it's really hard for me to discount it, to kind of tone it down in the decision making. So I guess for me, part of, I think why I laughed would have been exactly that sense of, oh my goodness, how the heck did we end up here? And what are we going to do about it? Because I don't believe that ChatGPT would serve self-represented litigants well at all, because they have no capacity. Literally, and I would say, I would put myself in this class, I would have no capacity to understand where the thing was failing. I'm in a worse state than if I didn't have that assistance. I think we can take one more question, because we were actually asked to wrap up a little bit early to
Tesh?
All right. Yeah, no, just circling back to the assignment we had, our table didn't come up with an agreeable understanding of what AI injustice is. For some, it's an oxymoron, it's fundamental injustice, and for others, it's kind of like contextual. So for me, as I said, my question is, can we, at the stage where the technology is now, can we even talk about AI injustice as if AI is some kind of universal tool to which we can attach these novel concepts, normative concepts, and should we even have that kind of discussion unless it's contextualized in many specific ways?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just take a stab at this when I'm shaking my head. I'm going, this is the key definitional lack of clarity in every room, everywhere you talk about AI. Everywhere. Like, what the heck do we mean when we say AI? And literally, it's a word that we use, like privacy, like ethics, like, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of them that we use, but we think we know what we're talking about. And literally, we don't. I think if you brought it to ground with 10 different people using that term, even in this room, you brought it to absolute ground and said, like, precisely what do you mean by that term? What's an example? They would look completely different.
I agree with you, but do we need to have a precise definition of AI to solve any systemic injustices that we already have documented?
I don't think.
And that we know that some AI amplify.
No, I don't think we need a precise definition, because I actually think there's a whole bunch of definitions that are relevant, but I think the problem is impossible to solve in the general. I think it has to be solved as I think about bringing it to ground. I don't know. So this is a specific problem. The problem of biased training sets is for machine learning that is used for prediction is a specific problem that requires a specific kind of solution.
I agree, but I think that, you know, in the conversation that we are having right now, and also, you know, the narrative about AI, I see a lot of silo conversation.
Yes.
And sometimes I think it's not helping, you know, the societal conversation that we should have about the impact of AI on human societies. And once again, you know, the collective interaction, because when you are talking, for example, about, you know, people using ChatGPT to go to court, for example, I will be very interesting to see in few years if their perspective or representation about access to justice have changed, because maybe some people will be helped because ChatGPT will have impact the justice system, maybe, but on people and their literacy, judicial literacy, maybe it will have a positive impact. So I don't know, and I think sometimes working in silo, this is an issue, and in Quebec we have like a consultation about, you know, implementation of AI, and it's very siloed. The conversation is siloed, and AI is actually a transversal issue.
I agree, and I think we have to know what we're talking about. I'm going to give the last word to Katie, because she's been very silent the last few minutes, and this is close us out.
All right. We need more funding for transdisciplinary
Yep.
research. We need more
Yes.
funding for interdisciplinary research. We need people to be less obsessed with what method are you using and more interest in who's at the table. And let's get some engineers and some computer scientists talking to some ethicists, talking to some lawyers, talking to some policy people, because that's the only way we're ever going to solve any of these.
Each bringing their very best, bringing absolute to the table, what they know about, what their strength, bringing their strength.
I will bring also to the table, to be honest, some people affected and some community
All right, they can
organization
come
and civil
too.
society.
The table
Because
is
when
big.
you see, for example, who raised the red flag the first, it was a civil society organization about, discrimination, facial recognition, and all that kind of systemic discrimination.
Right.
It was a civil society organization, and right now they don't have any space in that conversation. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Really appreciate you hanging in there. So to you too.